our discussion in this episode of the Virtual Sanctuary as we discuss technology and the church with Elder John Jacobs of Kingdom Life Christian Ministries located in San Antonio, Texas. So join us, come along, grab your tablets, grab your phones, take your notes, and join us as we discuss the church and digital technology in the virtual sanctuary. Now we're going to get an observation from Elder John Jacobs on what he feels is the state of the church based on his observations and the ministry work that he is doing today. So joining us today, we have our guest, Elder John Jacobs from San Antonio, Texas. Welcome, John. How are you?
I'm blessed. I'm happy to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm excited about our conversation today.
Awesome. We're so glad you could join us to give us your observation and perspective on what you think the state of the church is today. So, Elder Jacobs, if you could, share with us a little bit about your background.
Thank you, Elder Hagler. And again, thanks so much for the opportunity. So again, my name is John Jacobs. I'm originally from Tacoma, Washington. I grew up in a two-parent home. My father was a 30-year business owner, three brothers, four boys, all boys. God bless my mom. And so my dad was in ministry, but he was just kind of like a supporting ministry role growing up. Grew up in the Pentecostal church, also known as the Church of God in Christ. And I remember one day my dad was like, "I'm going to start a church." And we were like, "Why?" And so the family decided that we would do that, and I've been a pastor's kid pretty much all my life, or majority of my life, and so today my perspective. Also with that, I'm a doctoral student. I am an educator. I'm a motivator. I do that in higher education, outside in our community, in many facets, and also in the local church. I call myself a strategist. I help people think about. When you ask the question, the why 5 times, I'm the person who's asking the question, why, and what about that? And so I help churches, members, people kind of really think through their strategy and why they do what they do. And especially with this pandemic, I've been supporting a lot of people in kind of working themselves through and in that space. So today, my conversation, my framework comes from that me being an African-American male from the Pentecostal church, has working on a terminal degree, a pastor kid, and an elder in God's church.
Awesome. And I know, Elder, you sing too, yes?
I do. I always tell other people that I used to sing. My former career was singing, but yes, I have a couple albums out. Would travel and sing, and so I have some experience in the more of the business side of the music world. So yeah, I do a little singing and preaching.
Awesome. So were you music director in your father's church growing up?
Mm-hmm. I was the director of fine arts, so praise, dance, audio, sound, praise and worship team, choir, all that. Started directing. Matter of fact, someone posted a video of my former church when I was younger directing the choir. I think I was like 8 or 9 directing the adult choir. What is a 9-year-old doing directing the adult choir? I don't know, but I was doing that at 9 and 10. And so very involved musically, and then moved into the more administrative side as I kind of allowed other people kind of to practice their ministry and grow in their ministry. So yeah.
So you really grew up in the church.
Yeah.
You really did. And why we have Elder Jacobs on our show today is because of his ministerial experience from both being a pastor's kid, but also Elder Jacobs grew up in the church. He was very involved not only in the ministry portion, but also from an operational perspective, providing guidance for his father in the church. And with his doctoral studies, I thought he would bring a really great perspective and observation on what the current state of the church is today. So, Elder Jacobs, would you share with us, with all of your experience from an operational side, from the fine arts side, and also with the studies that you're currently doing with your doctoral degree. What do you believe is the state of the church today?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. That's a great question. I think people could answer it differently, but I would generally, I would like to say the state of the church is multi-dimensional, it's multifaceted, multi-generational. Notice I'm using the word multi often, meaning there's diversity, there's barriers. There is no church today that's thriving, that's set in one practice or a certain way. You explore many options, from ways you go about ministry to the types of ethnicities and music and worship experiences and different programming. They're diverse, they're multi in nature. So to me, the state of the church, I think the church is exploring its diversity. It's exploring the options that it has. More specifically, I said the church is multi-generational. I'm coming in from a young minister millennial perspective. I'm an older millennial, but a millennial from that perspective. And I'm learning to work, engage with older elders. I'm a young elder, but we have young ministers, we have older elders, we have church mothers, we have senior officers, bishops, we have apostles, we have all the fivefold ministry going on in the church, and they're from different generations. We even have the veteran generation, you have the baby boomers, the millennials, you have the Xers, and then you have the Generation Z that we often don't talk about, but they're in their 20s, 22, 23, and they want to be involved in ministry, right? And so I think a priority is multifaceted, but multi-generational. With that comes a lot of different dynamics, as you probably can imagine.
Yes, and when you talk about multifaceted and the church being able to reach across generational cohorts, what do you think is the biggest opportunity for churches to connect with the different generations, particularly millennials and Generation Z?
Yeah, you know what? What I'm blessed to have is a father that is open to learn, right? And that's really key and pivotal for church leaders today, pastors, bishops, apostles, is that since the church is multifaceted, you need to be open to learn, right? And so you said, what are the opportunities? Learning is an opportunity. I mean, even right now, a lot of leaders are learning the tech world, right? Learning how to use technology, learning how to use your iPhone, and learning how to use lighting and all that sort of that. So it's an opportunity to learn, and that's one of the exciting things about God. The Bible talks about us going from glory to glory, right? And then also says there's nothing new under the sun, right? While we're learning, God is like, I've already had that. It's already been created, right?
Yes.
I knew the beginning. I knew the ending at the beginning. So, but it's an opportunity to learn and explore God and uncover the things the Bible talks about that we don't know of, that God is revealing by His Spirit. He's revealing new things that we're learning. So the opportunity, the benefit of this time and this season of multi-generational, multifaceted church is learning. And if we can listen to each other, we're going to grow. We're going to grow. We're going to get stronger. We're going to get better. We're going to get wiser.
So, Elder Jacobs, I know that your father is still currently pastoring the church. And in this period of COVID-19, in this pandemic, where many churches are being challenged to reach their congregations, particularly because we're being faced with digital technology challenges, what are some of the challenges that your father as a pastor has talked about? That's my first question. And in that context, in a smaller church versus the larger mega churches, what's the comparison on the adjustment pastoring a church during this particular pandemic?
Absolutely. Those are some great questions. As relates to your first question, The conversation I have with my father is really focused on leadership, right? How do we move the needle? How do we move this multi-generational church? Specifically talking about those older generations to embrace what you discussed, the digital world, because we have no other options because of our states and our governors and our federal government limiting how we worship, or the modality, not if we can worship, but kind of regulating the modality. We have to use these technology, and so really helping our leaders kind of move the needle. What comes to my mind is, the Bible talks about Joshua and Moses and their leadership challenges, right? Moses, Joshua, the next generation, but Moses having all these people, and how do we get all the people to the promised land? And so there's all kinds of different schools of thoughts because they have a different perspective. Because remember, this is a multi-church, multi-generational church, and they come with their multi concepts and perspectives and ideas. But how do we focus in on what the kingdom of God needs, right? And so our conversation is on how do we get our leaders across there. I gave a funny analogy about, you have Deacon Cleophas, who has been a great asset to the church, but he's been a part of the church for 40 years. He knows his role. He comes to the church and opens the church at this time and locks the church at this time and does these things in service. And now he has to go online. How do we get him to embrace the new norm? Because we're not going back to what we were. It might be a version of, but we're not going back to that space. And so we're actually we just erected 2 churches. The face-to-face church we've always been working with, and then the e-church, right? And so those are the conversations that we have, and how do we maintain, because we're not going back. And then as relates to your second question about the differences between a small church and a large church, the small church on the front half of the pandemic, I believe has been really, really super successful because they have the opportunity to be intimate, have those relationships. So we went to that lockdown. It was like I could pick up the phone and call the 30 leaders that are on my list. You call your 30, you call your 30, your 30, your 30. We got a whole church. We're good.
Right.
But the mega church is like, calling tree, mass text, mass email, and kind of out of that personal touch is not there any longer. The upside of the mega church, they have the technology, the access, you can almost mimic the face-to-face experience virtually, because you can do what we're doing now, background screens and all kind of, different words flying there and scriptures. And so we don't have that access in a smaller church, but there is a happy medium.
And so what I hear you saying is, it sounds like there's 2 opportunities. One, there sounds like there's an opportunity to bring your leadership team into a mindset of innovation. Yes. Sounds like we're being challenged in that mindset of moving from the old church in the 4 walls to how do we reach outside of the church using technology. And then the second thing I hear you saying, sounds like some of the opportunities and struggles between the smaller churches and the larger mega churches are access to resources.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing I've noticed too, particularly watching online. You notice that with some of the larger mega churches, they are moving into a realm that they've already been operating in anyway, right? Yeah. Because they have the resources. So when you have these conversations with your father and you guys are talking about strategic planning to help minimize some of these challenges, what are some of the things that you're speaking to your father about? And with him being in an older generational cohort, what is his reception on some of what you're sharing? Talk to us about what you're sharing with him specifically on how do you begin to close the gap, bringing in your leadership team to have an innovation mindset.
Right. It's a hard conversation because at the crust, and just to be really honest, at the foundation of this is for this particular conversation about transition is succession planning. That is the crust of it, is Does your church, your entity, have a succession plan? And it's not a succession plan as if the pastor would be gone tomorrow, which that is a part of it, but also succession plan in regards to growing leadership, having a pipeline of emerging leaders, right? Like you discussed. That conversation is hard because that means the pastor and the leader, whether male or female, has to put their hands off of certain things, right? They have to let it go and let the process happen, right? And let things happen. And that's difficult for the small church. For the large church has been, as you said, has been operating in the corporate uh, fundamentals
Yes.
for a long time because they're a
Yeah.
larger structure. They have a lot of more accountability. The smaller church does not have to do that often. But now the smaller church has to embrace those things as we're moving into a new tech world. So our conversations on succession planning is on about a mentorship and guidance of leaders and grooming them so they can be leaders, and I think that, you know, I think it's okay for churches to realize that there's a difference between a pipeline and someone leaving your church, right? So a pipeline, it's okay to have programs where you mentor your leaders and then we send them out versus they leave with church hurt or frustration because they get the opportunity to be leaders and exercise their gifts. And we've got to fix that, right? We got to fix that because the church belongs to God and doesn't belong to us.
Yeah. Those are some great suggestions. I love when you talk about succession planning. In the virtual sanctuary, those are some of the things that we're going to talk about is strategic planning for the church. We mentioned earlier in our first segment, you've got to have a reevaluation of your vision, of your mission, and your values. And I love that you said succession planning, strategic planning, because I also believe if we're going to have influence and be effective in 21st century church, those are some of the things that we're going to have to incorporate in our church thought processes, and we're going to have to rethink how we do church.
Can I jump in there and say this? At the top of the year, many of us churches was like, ooh, this is going to be the year of the vision, and we're going to 2020. And it is still the year of the vision. It was just an inner vision, right? It was these conversations that we're having right now is vision, is forecasting. And I am so glad you talked, and you're going to be talking, or have been talking about reevaluating mission and vision. I believe, this is my personal opinion, that every church, I don't care if it's black, white, big, small, in the country, whatever area your church is, and the part of the vineyard your church is, every church should be reevaluating the mission and vision. I'm not saying that the mission has changed or God has changed. I said reevaluate because context has changed. Context has truly changed. Yeah. Technology has changed. The pandemic has changed us. The people have changed. We've got to reevaluate so that we can meet our vision and our objectives, and also make sure that God is pleased.
Yes, and I love that you said, Elder Jacobs, the commandment from God hasn't changed. He has still commanded us to disciple.
Go.
But what we have to do in discipling, we have to figure out, I believe, just based on my personal ministry experience and also based on the research that I've done in my doctoral studies, we've got to figure out how do we become innovative in doing the will of God. And you're right, it's about shifting our minds and thinking differently, but we still have the end goal in mind, discipling God's people, but we've got to be creative in how we do that.
The word we use in higher education is pivot.
Yes.
We've got to learn to pivot, and that is just being able to be what my dad calls an optional solutional thinker. Okay, this happened. Okay, how do we pivot? How do we change? How do we adapt? Because this is what God has ordained, and we have to go with God. We have to learn to go with God. And there'll be moments that we're struggling, but we got to keep going with God because there's still a promised land on the other side. There's still a promise
Yes.
that God's promise, as you said, has not changed. He still loves you. He has things for you, but you can't get to there if you give it up. You got to keep going and pivot.
Yeah, I like that. I like that word, pivot. And so as we come to a close, Elder Jacobs, for our viewers, if you could just share any last thoughts that you have on the state of the church, or any words of encouragement that you may have for our viewers on this particular topic, we'd love to hear from you.
It's okay that things are changing. It is in God's will that things go from glory to glory. It is the heart of God that we do not stay the same. Even the Bible talks about us when we come to Christ, old things are passed away. Behold, Psalms even talks about sing a new song, right? The Psalms is full of talking about newness and freshness. And Isaiah talks about, behold, have you not seen it? I'm doing a new thing. God is doing a new thing. And many of us have been fasting and praying and asking God for this newness. And I believe God is answering our prayers, right? Many of us is asking for this paradigm shift in the kingdom of God. And God is saying, I'm here. I'm even here in the storm. I'm right in the storm. Even the Bible talks about the storm was raging and Jesus was on the bottom of the boat sleeping peacefully. He got up and said, peace be still, and peace was still, right? And so we got to remember that. Have peace, and just really rest in God. There's 3 words, and I'll end on this, that the Lord gave me right before the pandemic, and I've been sharing this even when I have conversations with my job or with other believers and other webinars that I'm on. He gave me these 3 words. He gave me pace, space, and grace. Pace, space, and grace. So pace, meaning that God has given us opportunity in this pandemic for many of us who are go-getters to kind of calm down and let's be paceful. You did not see Jesus rush from miracle to miracle. He went pacefully. And as a church, as the church evolves and is changing in this new place, we need to realize it's going to be a paceful walk. It's going to be paceful. You ain't going to get there tomorrow. It's going to be paceful, right? As they say, Rome wasn't built in one day. It's going to be paceful. So if you're doing online stuff, just give yourself some time, some space, and some pace, because it's going to just take a little bit of space as relates to God's given us distance from each other, right? He's given us that space that we can be able to, for me, focus on my family. And so I encourage some leaders that you might, that have been really focused on the church. Well, your first ministry is your home. And so this opportunity to really hone in at home. And then lastly, grace. I think all of us need God's grace. God gives us grace every morning, and He gave us mercy, and we need grace for each other as we go through this change, this evolution of the church. The church is changing, but God has given us grace.
That is beautiful. I love it. Pace, space, and grace. That is a great concept to keep in mind as we go through this pandemic. It's not a marathon, right? We've got to pace ourselves, right? We've got to distance ourselves so we can refocus, and then God's going to give us the grace. Mm-hmm. Elder Jacobs, thank you so much for your insight, for your perspective. If our audience is looking to get in contact with you or to hear from you, is there contact information that you would like to share with the audience where they could reach out?
Absolutely. There's 2 ways to get a hold of me. You can go on LinkedIn, just type in John Troy Jacobs. My name is Troy, John Troy Jacobs. That's my professional one. You can see all my professional work and my trajectory and my tenure in higher education. If you want to just speak with me socially, engage with me, you can always go to my Instagram at JJ4EDU, at JJ4EDU. I love to have conversations. I love these conversations. I love to engage with other leaders and pastors about how we can continue the great work we're doing for God and for our community. So again, thank you for this opportunity.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much. We appreciate hearing from you. Thank you, Elder John Jacobs of Kingdom Life Christian Ministries in San Antonio, Texas. We thank you for sharing with us what your church is doing to connect with the world using digital technology. We thank you for joining us in the virtual sanctuary.